Hi, and welcome back to another episode of ManaTutor MTG Draft. Today we are going over our set review of Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Like the other set reviews we've been doing recently, we're not going to go over every card, but we are going to go over the signpost uncommons first to give you an idea of the archetypes in this set, followed by cards that we both, Matt and I, agree are C pluses or higher, so the cards to focus on at common. And then also after that, we'll go over the common cards that we've disagreed on the most. So really having a differential of about a full letter grade or at least 2 jumps. So we can talk about that. Before we dive into that, I want to remind everyone of our grading scale. We use a pretty standard, F through A grading scale, where Fs are your limited unplayables, your Ds are your filler cards, your Cs are your standard playables, your Bs are the cards that pull you into that color, and your As are your straight-out bombs, and obviously we'll give pluses or minuses to each of those. So an example is a lot of times the debate is between, say, a C plus and a B minus. That's saying it's on the high end of playable to just not enough to pull you into a color, for example, which would be a B minus is enough to pull you in. So yeah, this is the first time Matt and I are talking about this set. I mean, the spoilers just came out in full a couple days ago. Matt, how do you feel about this set so far?
I think this is going to be an interesting set. I think that it's going to be different, certainly. I'll say just at the outset, I'm not a huge fan of, I think, a lot of the mechanics, or I should say, I guess, mechanics in this case, because I feel like they're different than mechanics that we've seen in the past. I think that in the past, we've seen mechanics that really focus around a strategy, whereas I feel like in this set, some of the mechanics like explore and discover are just kind of, you can build with them, but you don't have to, focus entirely on them, right? Like
They're
if you've
not
got
synergies.
a couple of creatures, yeah, they're not synergy. That's probably the best way to say it. Yes. The only one that I feel like really is a synergy is Descent. And so I think it'll be an interesting, way to, talk about it. We haven't really discussed the mechanics. I don't know if you want to discuss the mechanics a little bit, but
we'll do that as we go through the signpost cards, because they pull out the mechanics, yeah.
Yeah, so, but yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. My hunch is to say that I think black is going to be the central color, right? I'm looking at it already and I'm like, hey, I want to be black something because I can do a lot with black. And then, there's other colors, and we'll talk about this when we get into some of the signpost uncommons here. But so that's kind of my initial hunch on the set. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that the general mechanics are less synergistic. I do think there are synergies that exist, though, as not named mechanics. So
Yes.
things like artifacts are a big item here. Yes, there is the craft with artifact, which I kind of see as another form of the adventure cards in a way, like where you're forced to play on one side and then you can play another later when you craft it, type of thing. But there's a lot of like tapping with artifacts and then like cares about artifacts type of thing going on. So I think those are a little more synergistic. But you're right. The descend mechanic is really the one synergy that is named.
Yeah.
But there's it's interesting. There's a lot of them do play together. Like Explorer plays with the caring about power and toughness being higher than base. There's a few other things that interact with it all. Map tokens, treasure tokens, there's a lot of that going on. Map with Explorer,
Sure.
and those are also artifacts as well.
The artifacts to tap, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. We should probably go into the signpost uncommons, and that will kind of show what all these archetypes are like. So let's dive on into that. Do you want to take our first card?
Sure. The first card that we have up here is Bartolome del Presidio.
You're going to butcher me on these names. That was way better than I would have said it.
I'm probably butchering it myself, but anyway, so he is a legendary creature, Vampire Knight. He's a 2/1 for 1 white, 1 black, and he has the ability to sacrifice another creature or artifact, and you put a +1/+1 counter on. So I think you haven't rated the uncommons yet, but I did rate the uncommons. So I'll say I gave him a C-. I think he's good, but he is kind of a build around strategy a little bit. Like you're going to need to have things that you want to sacrifice to him if you really want him to be useful to you. Now, again, if you've got a couple of, I mean, the interesting thing about black-white is there's not a lot of explore, or there's not a lot of like map token generation in black-white. White has some artifact token generation in a few of the cards, but you're probably looking at trying to also pick up something like Careening Minecart, which is another uncommon that you probably haven't seen because you haven't looked at the uncommons yet, but it's a 3/3 with vehicle with crew 1, and whenever it attacks, you create a treasure token. So something like that would really synergize with him really well. But I could see him working, but I don't know that I kind of rate him very highly. But I do think that he's a signpost for what black-white will be about. And that is going to be, trying to get creatures in or artifacts out, and then, sacrificing them to get them in graveyard for a descend mechanic style thing. But I'm not sure how well it's going to work, because I do feel like black and white are not particularly well synergized in this set, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that this one, like, yes, it does synergize with Descend, and I'm sure that will come up a portion of the time, but I feel like this is more like your black, white, grindy aristocrats type of a strategy, where you get a bunch of cheap things onto the battlefield and sacrifice them over time and just kind of efficient your opponent with all this other incremental little stuff you get in. I think the fact that this can sacrifice artifacts is a big piece of this. I think you'll get a lot of artifacts incidentally in play that are minor map tokens or treasures or other things that you can sacrifice to give something +1/+1. But that said, I agree, like, sacrificing a whole permanent each time just to get a +1/+1 counter on this creature is somewhat expensive to do, and it's an okay base rate for 2 to begin with, so I would probably give this a C+ in my mind, just because it does fuel the overall synergy of sacrificing things for this archetype, but yeah, not something I'm particularly drawn to up front.
Yeah, I will say that I know in the cards I've looked over, there are a couple of white commons and uncommons that create 1/1 gnome creatures or something, or artifacts or things like that, and those could be particularly useful with him, right? Because you have a chump blocker, you can chump block, sacrifice to him, make him more powerful. So I can see some use for that. I'm just not sure how often it'll come up in a way that's useful, right? But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how this guy does.
Up next, we have Captain Storm Cosmium Raider, legendary creature, a human pirate for a blue and a red. You get a 2/2 that whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. So this set is a bit less of a spell set, right? There's permanents matter kind of more. So this is not your blue-red typical spells type of deck. This is blue-red pirate artifacts is kind of how I read this. Cares about artifacts coming into play, things like that. You get a 2/2 for 2 here. I do like whenever any artifact comes into play, you put a +1/+1 counter on a pirate. There's a decent number of pirates.
She is herself a pirate, so you can put it on her.
So I like this one a little bit more than the last one. You don't have to sacrifice anything to activate it. I'd probably put this in the B- B type of range. I'll start off with the B-. But yeah, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I rated her a synergy B-, just because I think you really only want to play her in a deck where you have a lot of ways to generate artifacts. Now, again, that could be something like Careening Minecart, that you can get a treasure token every time it attacks, or there are a few blue cards that generate artifacts and have the ability to do that. There's interestingly not as much in red. There's a few, I think, that generate treasure tokens every now and then, but not so much reliably. But I do think if you can get a few of those, then she is in that B minus range. But if you can't, then I probably wouldn't rate her too highly. But I do think it's a good card, and I do think it like you said, it really does signal that blue red in this set is going to be different than other sets. It's going to be not the spells matter deck, but it's going to be like an artifacts matter deck, right? Like you are going to be trying to get as many artifacts out and then use those artifacts to do things like craft or power per, things like that. There's going to be a number of different ways you use them, but it's not going to be your typical blue red spell slinging control style.
Right. Yeah, I kind of get the feeling that blue-red will favor a bit more of like your tempo type strategy. Like this overall is get on the board, be relatively aggressive, then disrupt your opponent, maybe bounce something to get your creatures through that type of thing.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's one we may talk about later. I think it might be one where we differ to common, where it's like bounce a creature, create a map token. That plays very well with her.
Right, we do differ on that. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, we'll get to that one later.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, next one.
Yep. So next up we have Nikanziel, Current Conductor, and so this is your green-blue signpost uncommon. So for a green and a blue, you get a legendary creature, Merfolk Scout, who's a 2/3, so slightly above rate there. And the text is: whenever a creature you control explores a land card, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. And whenever a creature you control explores a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on Nikanziel, Current Conductor. So this is probably a good time to just briefly talk about the explore mechanic. When a creature you control explores, you reveal the top card of your library. If the revealed card is a land, it represents sort of your creature finding some type of new territory. You put that card into your hand, so you get the land in hand. And then if it's not a land card, your creature comes back sort of empty-handed, but they're a little bit more seasoned for the attempt. So you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then if it's not the land card, you can decide whether you are going to put that card on top of your library or into your graveyard. And so it's kind of an improved version of Surveil in that sense. And what Nikanziel does, right, is it makes your exploring better, right? So if you do get the land card, you can immediately put it onto the battlefield tapped, which is a huge ramp boost. And then also, if it's not a land card, the creature that explored gets a +1/+1 counter, and Nikanziel gets a +1/+1 counter. And if it's Nikanziel exploring, obviously you get 2 counters on that one. And so it's interesting, right? I think it certainly empowers the explore mechanic. Green and blue have, I think, almost a monopoly on explore creatures, although I think there are some white that create map tokens and things like that. But green and blue are really your signpost explores. I'm interested to see how well it plays, because I don't know that I love the explore mechanic. I think it's going to play a lot like the scry mechanic from green blue in the Lord of the Rings set, but I'm not sure. And green blue was really the worst archetype in that. Now here you get +1/+1 counters, so I think that'll potentially like elevate this a little bit. I'm just not sure whether it's going to be enough to really make it worthwhile. But we'll see, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I do like explore a lot more than scry. I like drawing cards when it's a land, and the +1/+1 when it's not on top of your scry is a nice upgrade. So I do think this will be better than the blue green.
Yes, I 100%. I agree. It will be better. I'm not sure it's gonna elevate blue green out of like bottom position. I mean, it might, but I don't know that it makes it top. Right?
Now, also this card itself does not explore, so you need to have the synergies with other things. Now it is a 2/3 for 2, which is above rate to begin with, and the Explore cards seem reasonable. Like, they're not nerfed too much with having Explore. So I think this will come together reasonably. But it is a question of, Explore is better early when you need to be drawing your lands. Now, you do want to also have it late in order to ramp into things, and there are a decent amount of things that you want to be hitting your land drops for to get into. Yeah, so I, I don't know. Nikanzo will definitely be a card. I will play it. I will be playing. It's a good card. But I do want to have a lot of my earlier drops have Explore as well. And
Yeah.
as such, with it not having Explore, I do see a little bit of a
Yeah.
problem there. Like, I want my earlier cards to have Explore to begin with. So yeah, I mean, I would probably give Decanzil like a B minus to start. It's enough to pull me in, but I guess it's also slightly that I'm skeptical of blue green as well.
Yeah. I actually have it a little higher. I have it as Synergy B because for all the reasons you said, right? Like, I'm going to want to make sure that I have. It's going to be like in Lord of the Rings where you kind of needed that, threshold of ring temps. You're going to need a threshold of explores and particularly early explores. And there are a lot of 1 and 2 cost green and blue creatures that have explore in some way, or when they come in to enter the battlefield, create a map token, that kind of thing. But you're going to need that threshold above which that this really becomes a powerhouse, signpost card for your deck in order to make it worthwhile. But if you only get like 1 or 2 or 3, it's like, okay, I mean, yeah, this is a slightly overstated creature, but it's not going to do a whole lot for you. And I'm not sure it rates, really well for the deck. But if you're not getting a lot of explore, you're probably not playing green blue. Yeah. So,
I will say, this set's a little hard to judge because there's not a whole lot of great removal, which is the opposite of what we've seen in a lot of other sets. And as such, the ramp type of mechanic, which is often not good because you don't have time for it in most sets, you might have time for it in this set. And as such, this type of ramping, both in the +1/+1 and the lands earlier to get big things out, might play better. So I want to reserve judgment on this card. I can see it playing better than we're giving it credit for. Up next, we have Zoyoa Lavatongue. For black and a red, you get a 2/2 legendary creature Goblin Warlock with Death Touch. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Zoyoa Lavatongue deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't. Alright, so this is our first keyword of descended that we looked at. So we mentioned that that's kind of the one synergistic keyword that we've talked about. And descended, anything that deals with descend is about permanents in your graveyard. Now, descended, the action of descending, is when a permanent reaches the graveyard from anywhere. So this could be you discarding a permanent, or sacrificing a permanent,
dying.
Yep. All those will trigger the fact that you descended this turn, and will turn on Zoyoa Lavatongue.
One thing to mention, permanent card, right? So a token technically touches the graveyard, but it is specific to a permanent card. So, using a treasure token does not count as descendant.
Yep, great call out. One thing to mention is we talked about the Explore mechanic just a second ago. Explore and Descend do go together well because of that whole, you could put the permanent card into your graveyard, so that will trigger Descended as well. That said, I don't think there's a whole lot of...
There's not a lot of
overlap there, yeah. So, so it's hard to judge what that synergy really will be like. But yeah, I think Black-Red seems to... It does care about things being in your graveyard. It particularly cares a bit more than the other color pairs that still care about Descended, about the action of descending, whereas some other colors will care about the descend mechanic that matters of how many permanent cards are in your graveyard. So you'll see, like, Descend 4 means if you have 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you get another bonus. But yeah, Black Red does look like your version of a Descend aggro type deck. What do you think about this, Matt?
I mean, I love this card. I think it's great. 2 for 2 is great with Death Touch. Is just outright is just a great card. The thing for it that really kind of puts it over the top for me is that almost every black card is really focused on Descend in a lot of ways, right? There are so many black commons, some of which we'll get into when we have our discussion, that will put things in your graveyard or give you the option to put things in your graveyard. And doing so means that you can basically power when you descend. And that just makes this super great, right? Because you can essentially force your opponents to discard cards or sacrifice permanents or take 3 damage, right? And like being able to start that on turn 2. You probably can't start it on turn 2 because you can play her on turn 2, and then you're probably not descending that turn. Although you could, if you had a 1/1, you attack in and your opponent blocks. There's ways you can do it, but the fact that you can kind of start really putting your opponent on a timer with this card early in the game, and that there are so many cards in black that allow you to do that, I think will really make this a high priority target for any removal your opponent does have. Therefore, allowing you to potentially get some bigger things out. If you're descending, though, you can get some big things out that a lot of the descend mechanics power big creatures. So I think this has a lot of synergies with the idea of descend, and I really like this card. I rated it a B-, and I didn't even rate it a synergy B- because again, so much of black really does descend that if you're in black, you're playing descend to some extent. And so if I'm in black, I would strongly consider this card and consider red it's my other color if it were open.
Yeah, so like you mentioned earlier, I didn't quite grade all the uncommons yet. The only uncommons I looked over were the signposts. But I'm actually, as somebody that I know you like black and red when paired with black a decent amount of the time in sets, I figured you'd go a little bit higher on this even. I think I would give this probably a B. Because it's good early and good late. Late, you can get some of these triggers to happen, or at the very worst, a 2/2 Death Touch will stop your giant opponent creature. I will say there are a lot of incidental small permanents around, so your opponent may often have the option to sacrifice a treasure, something smaller. So it's not that sacrifice type of trigger doesn't roll away with the game quite as much, I think, as it would in some other sets, for example. But still,
and late game they can sacrifice lands potentially if they've got extra lands. There are ways, but it's going to be slowing down your opponent quite a bit, and I see that as if you are playing black red aggro and you are able to slow down your green blue opponent's ramp or something like that advantages you. So, I think it's a really strong card. You might be right. I might be underrating it. Next up, we have Akawali, the Seething Tower. And so this is our black-green signpost uncommon. It costs 1 colorless. This is the first one that doesn't cost 2. So it is cost 3, 1 colorless, 1 black, 1 green. For that, you get a legendary creature Fungus, a 3/3, with the abilities Descend 4, which means if you have 4 or more permanents in your graveyard, Akawali, the Seething Tower, gets +2/+2 and has Trample. And then it also has Descend 8, and that means as long as there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, it gets an additional +2/+2 and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. And so this is another card that I think is fantastic. It's an at-rate, card. And if you're playing black, you're probably playing Descend to some extent. Descend 8 might be a little difficult to reach, especially when you're playing with a 40-card deck, and you're going to have some instants and sorceries in there. But if the game goes long, this could come out of the gate as a 7/7 trample, can't be blocked by more than 1 creature for 3 mana. So that's just fantastic. Even if you only get to the Descend 4 and it's just a 5/5 trample for 3, again, also fantastic. So as long as you've got a way to get those permanents in your graveyard, this is just, I think, an all-around fantastic card. What do you think?
Yeah, in general, I kind of like 3/3 for 3. Sometimes they even nerf that a little bit to make it not quite as powerful. I mean, in other sets, they do give it a little bit of a bonus. It depends. But I think that bonus of the Descend 4 is quite a good bonus. Descend 4, you're gonna want some things to feed that to get it early enough in the game.
Yeah.
But then you have a 5/5 trampler for 3, and eventually you can get make it another +2/+2 on top of that. So for 3, now you're talking 7/7 trample. It can only be blocked by one creature, and
Yeah.
it still has trample, right? Yeah.
It retains its original bonus. Yeah, and so that's what makes it insane, right? Because you can't, you need a 7/7 to kill it, and otherwise it's just going to eventually wear down your opponent.
Yeah. So yeah, it is just a big beefy creature, but I like those big beefy creatures when they have trample. Trample is a big
The
item.
fact that it comes with that when you have Descend 4 is great. You don't have to, play an instant. You don't have to enchant it. Yeah. I think I gave this a synergy B, but I think I would change it to a B. I think I graded this one because it's in the A's early, but then I realized how much Descend is really in black, and I'm like, you're gonna get to 4 on this, almost every game. So I think it's just a straight B for me. Like if I see this and I'm already in black or I'm already in green and the other one looks remotely open, I'm taking it.
I'd agree. Up next, we have Kutzil Malamet Exemplar. For 1 green-white, you get a 3/3 Cat Warrior legendary creature. With your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, and whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So you just mentioned we like 3/3 for 3s. I guess I'll mention green-white seems to care about the creatures being pumped a bit in some way.
Yes.
There are a decent amount of cards that, first of all, like with the Explorer, you get +1/+1 counters. There's other things that come into play with +1/+1 counters or give them in some way. Furthermore, there are just cards that pump up, give +2/+1 or things like that without being counters. So I wouldn't just quite call this green-white counters, but counters are a piece of the,
Yes.
The having power and toughness greater. But yeah, this is a good one. We did mention removal is a little bit lighter in this set, so it seems a little less often that your opponents will be trying to cast spells during your turn than most sets, but blue still does have a decent amount of instants to be playing on your opponent's turn and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that will matter, and then if you get to draw a card off of this too, that always matters, all right? So I like this card a good amount. I think I want to start this off as a B-, and I think what I'm really judging here is that means I like the card, it pulls me in, but I like cards that do more for you the turn you play them than having to wait and kind of synergize with other things. So I think this gets kind of a knock on that, just being a 3-mana 3/3 basically up front, and that's it. But like we said, there's less removal, and if you can't kill this thing will be able to run away with the game. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, no, I like this card a lot too. I think I rated it a C+, so kind of same range as you. I don't know that it quite pulls me into green-white on its own, right? If I've seen a couple other things, if the colors look open in the draft, and I've seen some other things that enable explore and to put counters on things, then sure. I do like it because while you're right, there's not a lot of removal, and so there's your opponents are probably going to be playing less spells on your turn. There are a number of artifacts with flash, and so this will stop your opponents from flashing in some artifacts. I think there's an uncommon artifact called like Runaway Boulder or something that it costs 5 colorless, It has flash. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target creature. So like that will stop things like that as well. So I do think that it, has a little bit of utility there, but it really does rely on you having the ability. Like the real value is going to come when you can synergize this with your explores or other ways to get counters, on the base power and toughness of your creatures. But I'm not sure how often that'll happen. So I'm kind of like I want to start this at a C+ and see where it goes. And if there's opportunities to pump creatures later, then I think like I could go up on it.
Yeah. Yeah, you've kind of talked me down to a C+. The ability there of drawing the card is quite good, but you need to make the thing happen, and it relies on a lot of other things. So the need for support there is what pulls me down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next card.
Yep. So next up we have Caparocti Sunborn, and this is your red-white signpost uncommon. It is also the first 4/4, the first one to cost 4 that we've discussed today. It costs 2 colorless, 1 red, 1 white. For that, you get a 4/4 legendary human soldier. It has the ability for whenever it attacks, you may tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3. So discover, this is the first time we've talked about this mechanic. So basically with discover, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with a mana value equal to or less than what your discover value. At that point, you may do one of 2 things. You can either cast it without paying its mana cost or put it into your hand. And then you put the rest of the cards that you'd exile back on your library in a bottom of your library in a random order. And so basically with this guy, every time he attacks, if you tap down 2 other creatures or artifacts, you can either cast a card with mana value 3 or less directly. Now you're not going to know what that is necessarily, or put it in your hand for later. So I really like this guy. I think that it shows that red-white is going to be all about discover and the ability to play additional cards for free. And so I like that he's a 4/4, so you're not necessarily going to be as scared to attack with him. I do think he's very contingent on you having enough squares on the board to tap down with him. So you need to have some map tokens, or you need to have some cheap treasure tokens, or something that you can afford to tap. Otherwise, he's not going to do a lot for you. But if you can play him with a number of cheap things in your deck, you can get more things out, right? So if you've got cheap creatures, and you discover and you play that creature card immediately, great. So now you've got another square on the board that you can tap with next turn to power him even more. So he's kind of you have to stop him early, or if you don't and you can really get a ramp going with him, you're just going to burn through your deck and have so many creatures out, and your opponent's just not going to be able to stop you. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting to see red-white not be the weenie aggro deck, right? I'm not saying it's slow. It's still maybe more like a mid-range, but it's not just trying to be all weenies now and kill your opponent early in the game, going under everything like red-white typically does.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different. I like the discover mechanic quite a bit. I think it's quite powerful on its own. This is at rate to begin with, a 4/4 for 4. And yes, it doesn't do something right when it comes into play, but I'm okay with that if we're at rate to begin with. And then if they don't stop this, next turn I'm most likely going to be able to trigger it. You're right,
Yeah.
You do have to have your artifacts and creatures, cheap enough to be on the board, but I expect that to happen by turn 5, such that when I attack, I can do that. And at that point, it just becomes a great card, to the point where I would give this, I probably start this at a B+, personally. I think this is the best card I've seen in the set so far, really. What do you think on the rating, though?
I actually gave him lower, and I think I may have rated him too low. I think I rated him early before I saw. I gave him a C plus. I'm sure that's too low. I'm sure he's more in the B range, like you said. I might give him a B minus though, because the thing for me, and I know you haven't gone through all the uncommons yet, is there's not a lot of discovery. So, he's kind of going to be like your discover engine in a lot of decks. Now, there are a couple, and, I think we might discuss them either in this episode or another episode where we go over the uncommons, where I think they can also help power. There's one in particular that I know we're discussing today, that's, in red. But you really need those as well to kind of help power through. To get some more of those additional permanents out on the board, I think. But I do think he's really good. I just don't know. I don't know how good. It'll remain to be seen. I want to kind of play with him a few times and see where we get. But I do think he's really good. I'd probably start him off at C plus is too low. Probably more like a B minus, maybe B range.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think you necessarily need a lot of other discover stuff in your deck for this. I do think you want to maybe avoid your one drops a bit more, because if you discover into one drop, that is not so great. So that's kind of the one disclaimer I'd put on discover.
Sure. Yeah. But it helps feed him, right? Because if you get a one drop, you don't need to attack with it. You can just tap it to help feed him in the future.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking more to play like my two drops and 3 drops that happen to get 2 permanents on the battlefield. Like, and there's some we probably will discuss later on that do that. So that's how I'm looking to feed into having more permanents to tap. Up next, we have Master's Guide Mural for 3 white and a blue. You get an artifact with when it enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token. I guess that's golem, not golem. I'm used to the Lord of the Rings. It has also craft with artifact. So this is the first time seeing craft. For 4 white, blue, you exile this artifact, then exile another artifact you control or an artifact card from your graveyard. Return this card transformed under its control. Craft only as a sorcery. So there's a series of these craft with X, where X tells you what you need to craft it with. This one happens to say artifact. Most of them, I think, do say artifact, at least what I've seen so far in the set.
Some creature, and I think 1 or 2 that are land as well.
Yeah. So you can, it could be something from play that you remove on out in exile, or it can be from your graveyard, that type of card being exiled with this. And then that's kind of your cost to craft. And when you craft it, I'll transform the card here. You get a tap it to create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token. Activate only if Master's Manufactory or another artifact enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So you get an engine to create more 4/4s, but again, only triggers when you've done the crafting or an artifact enter the battlefield. So blue-white looks like it's a craft control deck. Craft tends to be pretty expensive for what I've seen across the board. So I think there's going to be a lot of disrupt early and then craft late to take you away with the game. This might be a little bit of my bias towards like being proactive rather than getting to the late game, but I don't love this card that much. I see a 5-mana 4/4 to begin with, and then you're paying 7 to be able to craft, and then you have to get things onto the battlefield to really get more 4/4s going. So I don't know. I will say if you're in a safe place where the game is under your control, you can run away with this down the line. But I don't like to have to get to that point. I'd rather be proactive up front. But what do you think of this, Matt?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think pretty much completely. I think it could be a good card in the right deck, but I think it's very much win more in a lot of ways. Like, this card is not going to help. Like, if you're thinking quadrant theory, this card is not going to help you when you're behind. If you're behind and you need things, you don't have 7 mana to transform this. You don't have, you're talking 12 mana to get it out and then to transform it. and you have to have an artifact on the board that you're willing to sacrifice, or one in graveyard that you're willing to exile. And I'm not sure that it does enough for that. And then you got to constantly be playing more artifacts in order to really benefit from its ability. So, I'm not sure. Like, you're really going to have to play a control style early, like you said, in order to really benefit from this. Now, there are some decent cards in blue-white that will let you do that, but I'm not sure it's going to be enough, right, to really stop an aggro deck. And I think that this archetype, the blue-white archetype, at least from what I've seen of it, and I haven't really looked at the rares yet, but I've looked at the commons and uncommons, I'm not sure it's going to stand up well against an aggro deck, a black-red aggro, or a black-green aggro, or something like that, or red something aggro. I'm not sure. But, I gave this a Synergy B in my rating, because if you can build the right deck around it, I think it's a great card. If
you want it in your blue-white if you got the right...
You absolutely want it in your blue-white if you have enough to work with it, because, it will do work eventually, but I'm not sure you get there.
I agree. The only comment I have to add is maybe how to think of craft. I kind of think of craft like adventure, just a kind of worse adventure card, in that... you play the first side, like you have to play the first side, and then eventually you get to craft to create the second side. You do need to pay that exile cost of something, but I don't think that's going to be hard to pay in a lot of cases, for your expensive ones at least. I guess I haven't seen all the cards, so there might be some cheaper ones that will prevent you from crafting early on in the game because you don't have that resource, but that's kind of how to be thinking of these cards, is like the adventures. But the adventures seem to be a lot better in the last set than at least what I've seen so far.
Well, you have that choice, right? You can choose whether you want to do the adventure. This, you have to play the original card before you can do the craft. So, anyways, it's I agree with you 100% on that one.
Okay.
So next up, we have our blue-black signpost uncommon, and it is Uchbenbach, the Great Mistake. And you have, for 3 colorless, 1 blue and 1 black, you get a 6/4 legendary skeleton horror with vigilance and menace. And it has an ability for descend 8, meaning if you have 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you can pay 4 colorless, 1 blue and 1 black to return him from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Now, a finality counter is basically a counter that says that if the creature would die with a finality counter on it, you exile it instead, so you can only bring him back once. And so you can also only activate this ability of him as a sorcery, so you can't do it on your opponent's turn. I really like this card. I think he's, bang on for what blue-black is going to be about in this set. Both blue and black can give you a lot of descend if done right. I think he will play... I don't know that blue-black control is going to be so much of a thing, but I do think blue-black descend is going to be a very prominent mechanic that folks will use. And he just plays right into it. And the fact that he can come back, the fact that he's got vigilance and menace, for 5 mana, 6... I don't mind a 6/4 for 5.
Right.
And if he's got vigilance and menace, the menace is going to make it less likely that your opponent's going to kill him. Vigilance is going to mean that he can swing. And even if your opponent does kill him, you can bring him back later. He counts as one of the 8 cards you need for descend, so to bring him back. So I think I all around love him. I don't remember what I rated him, but it's probably pretty high. I gave him this is too low. I gave him a C+. It should probably be
low.
It should be a B. He's a B.
I would agree with B. Yeah, it's just a good card all around. The first time you play him, the fact that you can play him a second time, and probably not that hard with these colors to get that in the late game either. No. Descend 8 is a big ask, but if you build around it right, which you probably will in these colors, you should get there. And I mostly like even that he's a good card up front too. So
yeah. He's, I mean, 6/4 vigilance menace for 5 is a fantastic card. So
up next we have Itzquinth, firstborn of Gishath. Yeah, I told you I'd butcher these names, but red green for a 2/3 dinosaur legendary creature. It has haste. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2. When you do, target dinosaur you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. All right, above rate to begin with. 2/3 for 2, great. Haste seems like exactly what you want in red green here. It's red green seems to be a stompy deck, and the ability makes it also good when you draw them late too. Pay 4 to be able to probably knock something out of the way and get a creature on board. Kind of get a little bit of like a Flame Tongue Kabu type of effect going on here, actually. So I like this card a good amount. Probably would say probably about a B as well here, in my opinion. What do you think, Matt?
yeah, I initially rated him as C plus, but after looking more over it, I'd probably go to more like a B minus on him. I'm not sure he's quite a B for me. I think he is overstated for his price, and the haste helps a lot. If you get him out early, you're swinging turn 2 with him. That's great. I think it's going to depend on how good or how often you're able to use his second ability, and whether or not he himself is a dino. So no matter what, like if you get him later, even if you don't have any other dinos, you can deal 2. But I'm not sure 2 is going to be enough. Like there are a few dinos, and I think we'll talk about a couple that are well statted enough that I think he plays along with pretty well, like Dinotomaton, things like that. But I think it's going to depend on how often you get to use his second ability, whether he kind of rises to that B level or B minus. I mean, he's a great card. I think if I see him, if I see green is open, red is open, or I'm already in those colors, he's a pretty instant pickup for me. Yeah, I mean, I think he's overall in power like slightly less powerful than some of the other ones we've seen. Some of the other signpost uncommons, certainly Uchbenbach, I would say is higher up than him in my mind. So that's kind of why I would maybe trend towards the B minus. But he's a great card, and I will probably play him or her. It's hard to tell. It's
It.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much agree with everything you said. I do think I like the card a little bit more than you do based upon tone there, but I think that's reflected in the B. But I agree with everything.
Yep.
Up next, we have some commons that we both agree were a C plus grade or better. So we're starting off first with white. We have Ironpaw Aspirant. For 1 and a white, you get a 1/2 Cat Warrior creature. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Kind of like we said this last card, overstated, and in that it comes into play itself as a 2/3, but it has the extra benefit that you can put it on something as a better target if you wanted to, in the way that +1/+1 counter has haste. And this plays with synergies with having higher power than your base power as well. So quite a bit for a common. What do you think of this, Matt?
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is a great card, and as you said, this plays excellent synergy, especially as a common where you could get several of these with Kutzil, Malamet Exemplar, right? You can play this guy turn 2, put the counter on him, attack with him turn 3 after playing Kutzil, and unless your opponent blocks and probably sacrifices a creature in doing so, you're drawing an extra card on turn 3, right? So I think it plays really well with that. And again, as a common, you can get 2, maybe 3 of these potentially, and really get an engine going. The fact that it gives you an option to put the counter on something else later, like if you play this guy a little bit later and you just want him as a chump blocker or something that you can tap down to, pay a tap cost, like in red white, right? So the red white, I forget his name off the top of my head here. I don't have him. Capricati Sunborn, or sorry, Caparocti Sunborn, right? So if you can, put this guy out late, put your counter on Caparocti Sunborn, right? And now he's a 5/5, and then you can tap this guy to do the Discover mechanic, right? There's a number of good synergies, I think, with it, and so for me, that's what really makes it stand out as a really good card.
Yep. I say we both put this as a C+.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So next up in black, we have Vito's Inquisitor. It costs 3 colorless, 1 black, for a 3/3 Vampire Knight. It has the ability to pay 1 black and sacrifice another creature or artifact. You put a +1/+1 counter on Vito's Inquisitor. It gains Menace until end of turn. It's a little understated to begin with, but the ability on it is really good. And, it helps feed that Descend mechanic to just be able to sacrifice another creature. The fact that you can chump block with something, then sacrifice it to make Vito's Inquisitor stronger, or you can do it on your turn to feed the if you descended this turn mechanic and also give him Menace and then attack with him. Or her, I think it's a her. It actually looks like a her. So attack with it makes it, super powerful. I think it's just a fantastic comment. But what about you?
Yeah, so we both gave this C+. I will say I gave it a C+, and I still agree with that. I was a little bit tempted to go down to C on this, for the same reason I mentioned multiple times that I don't like when things come into play not at a great rate, and so this is a 4-mana 3/3 in that aspect. That said, I do think the ability is enough to pump it over to the C+ range, for all the reasons you said, and I like that this is repeatable.
Yes.
You can really, if you're able to play this once to make it a 4/4 with Menace there, and then you have extra black mana up where you can start pumping this up, like you can make it to the point where they have to block it with 2 creatures, or you can finish the game.
Or die.
Yeah, exactly. And then also if they block it with the 2, you can continue pumping to kill out their 2 creatures if it's not enough. So that's a lot for this. So even though it comes understated, I think it made up for it with that awesome ability.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key for me here is this really gives you a lot of options on the offense, right? So let's say you've got 3 other creatures on the board, you swing with everything. Your opponent now has to decide how to assign their blockers, because if they block the other things, you can just sacrifice them, pump this, and potentially deal a lethal blow. Versus, okay, well, if they block this, then the other creatures will get through and, do a lot of damage. And so that to me is what really makes this card really good in my mind, is it gives you options on the offense during the game. And so that's one of the reasons I really like it.
All right, moving on to red. We have one to bring up that's always been a good card in Limited, but I think is especially good in this set. It's probably some of the best removal in this set, which we said is not full of great removal, but I do like Abrade. For 1 and a red, you get an instant. Choose one. You can either deal 3 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. In this set in particular, the artifact theme is high, so destroy target artifact will come up on much more than it does in a typical set. And if not, the dealing 3 damage to something for 2 has also always been good at instant speed. So that combination, optionality, just makes it a strong card. I put this as a B, and I wouldn't be horribly surprised if this played out as something like a B+, but I'm starting at a B.
Yeah, I think I put it as a C+ just because I'm I find it hard to be drawn into a color just for, seeing a removal spell. But if I'm even thinking about red, I'm taking this card if I see it. It's excellent, for all the reasons you said. It's a lightning bolt plus, and at common and instant speed is great. Next up, also in red, we have Dinotomaton, which for 3 colorless and 1 red, you get a 4/3 artifact creature dinosaur gnome, which might be the first time we've ever seen a dinosaur gnome. I'm not sure. I know we've seen dinosaur cats. I'm actually kind of sad that there are no dinosaur cats in this, but or cat dinosaurs. It has Menace, And when it enters the battlefield, target creature you control also gains menace until end of turn. So this is just excellent. This is Relentless Rohirrim, but better. It's also a 4/3, but it gives something else menace, which is just fantastic, and the ability to basically force your opponent to sacrifice extra blockers is great. It plays well with what is it? Eats Queenth, right? Like it's strong enough that if you play this first and then you play Eats Queenth next turn, you can basically Flame Konkavu something using it. And then, so I think there's a lot of synergies here with the dinos, but all in all, I think this card, it's a little bit below statted, but I think the menace makes up for it. And the fact that you can give something else menace when it enters the battlefield is just great.
Yeah, I had this as another like C+. I think in general, I give this card a C, but the abilities bring it up enough, like with giving something else menace and it having menace on top of itself. I'm not ready to call this Relentless Rohirrim, but I do think this is a good card for the set. Up next, we have Etali's Favor. For 2 and a red, you get a Aura Enchantment, enchant creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, discover 3, and then enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has trample. So Discover, I think we mentioned already, we like that mechanic. As long as you don't fill up your deck with 1-drops, the Discover will be a pretty good mechanic. Paying 3 to get, then if you're not filling with 1s, you're going to get a 2-drop or a 3-drop for 3. So you're already getting, if you get the 2-drop, it's understated, sure, but you get the +1/+1 and trample on top of that, making it be worth it. So the only time you're really finding downside is if you have 1-drops that you hit. So it's either a really efficient 3-drop or basically an at-rate 2-drop with this card. So I think it meets the efficiency threshold and therefore is quite a good card. Probably gave this a C+, I think.
Yeah, I think I gave it a C+ as well. So I really like it, and I really like it for a number of reasons, right? It's common, so there's options where you could get multiples of these. And I think that if I'm playing red-white, I'm going to be looking to play probably 0 or maybe 1 or 2 1-drops and almost entirely 2 and 3-drops, maybe with an emphasis on 3-drops, specifically because of this card and Caparocti Sunborn, which also discovers 3 when it attacks if you tap down the creatures. And I think that that's going to be a really good potential engine to just get out half of your board, right? So, like, I'm thinking about this card, right? You play this and you discover 3. You could discover another one of these and play that, and then it discovers 3 again, right? And you've just created it's essentially Cascade, but better because it's the same monogram. And so I'm looking to probably like stack my deck if I get like a Caparocti Sunborn or 2 and then like 3 of these. Like I'm just going to pick 2 and 3-drop creatures and just hope to drop a couple of these, drop Caparocti Sunborn, and then just try and like blow up by blow up I mean like expand my board crazy wide by attacking and just constantly getting immediate new creatures out on the board. And I'm probably not going to play a lot of instants and sorceries in that case because I'm going to be looking to want to get permanents on the board. Although, you can discover an Abrade, and congratulations, you've now just blown up an opponent's creature probably. So there's a lot of ways I think that this could be really useful. I would probably be looking to play like 2 or 3 of these in a deck along with Caparocti Sunborn just to get some reliability going with it. But anyways, that's what I think about it. I think it's excellent. Okay. Moving on now to green, and I think we only have one green in here that we both agreed was really excellent, and that is Poison Dart Frog. For 1 colorless and 1 green, you get a 1/1 with Reach. It's a frog creature. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, and you can pay 2 colorless to give it Death Touch until end of turn. So this is a really great mana dork. It's a little overpriced for what it is, but I think it's pretty common that we've seen a lot of these, pay 2 for a 1/1 that can tap for any color. The last few sets we've seen some version of this. But this one also has reach, and this one also has the ability to pay to give it Death Touch. And that, for me, just makes it a really excellent common. And I would play this in any green deck, but it becomes even better if you're splashing colors. It becomes even better if you, you know, if flying becomes a thing and you think you're going to need to defend against some flyers later in the game. You know, the ability to give it reach with Death Touch. I mean, you know, your opponent's not going to want to attack with their flyers. So yeah, I think this is an excellent card. I think I rated it a C+, but this might almost be a B-. It's just, it's really good.
You did do B-.
Oh, did I? Yeah. Okay.
I agree with everything you said. I think I'm slightly lower on this. I mean, I think this is a C+. But it is a little bit understated, to your point. A lot of times they'll make these mana dorks be 1/3s. But mana dorks have always been, playable, but often not really that great for 2 mana. And they have been pushing to see what they can do to make them better and even more playable. And I think they accomplished it here. The problem with mana dorks, 2 mana mana dorks, is you need them early to be the efficient mana dork that you want, and then late game they're not a whole lot.
Useless.
Yeah. And this one being a reach Death Toucher, effectively, makes it good in the late game as well. So because of that, the versatility of being good in both cases, I like this a lot. The 2 for Death Touch would be kind of a lot, except for the fact that you can activate to pay for the 1. You can block, tap it, and tap one other.
Yeah, so it effectively costs 1 to give it Death Touch in most cases, unless it's, got summoning sickness. But
right.
But otherwise, and it's just it's so versatile. And that, for me, is going to make this a pretty staple common in any green deck. But particularly if I'm looking to splash for anything, right? I'll be looking for a number of these to help fill out that splash.
Definitely. Up next, we had a couple of notable commons we want to call out before we go into the cards that we disagreed on the most. A couple things to call out really is, well, first, we had no blue cards that we considered both to be C+ or above. I'm pretty sure we both had some cards that were at least C+ on blue, but they were different between us. And I think that points to the point that blue, I think, is being considered the weakest color so far. We'll see how it plays out. These early things are really hard to judge, but it is notable that blue looks kind of lower to both of us. But one that I did want to call out is Water Wind Scout, which kind of goes towards I think this set cares about rectangles. Now, this is totally going off of Ethan's, from Lords of Limited, theory of rectangle theory, where basically the more permanents you can get on the battlefield, the more rectangles, whether they're tokens, whether they're cards, whatever, that you get out. Whoever gets more of those out is more likely to win, because those are resources to be using. And Water Wind Scout does that. So for 2 and a blue, you get a 2/2 flying merfolk scout creature, and when it enters the battlefield, create a map token. So this is a lot like your cards that were good in Wilds of Eldraine, like Sweet Tooth Witch, for example, which was a 3 mana drop 3/2 that had a food token that it came with. A lot of
Welcome to Sweet Tooth.
Welcome to Sweet Tooth did that as well. There were a lot of these cards that created a token of some sort for relatively cheap. The best ones were 2-drops, like also Tough Cookie, for example, was so good because it did this and it had additional abilities on top of it. But early in the game, a 2-drop that also gives you another token is great. Usually you'll see this, though, at least at common, at the 3 mana. And so I like these 3 manas that do this. What do you think? Yeah, what do you think, Matt?
Oh, I agree. I can't exactly remember what I rated. I'm going to look this up right now. I gave it a C-. Okay. So yeah, I rated this lower. For me, it's a little slow, especially because it creates the map token, and then you got to pay an additional 1 to use the map token. But you may well be right? If you can use that map token for other things other than the Explore by sacrificing it, then I think it maybe brings it up a little bit. A 2/2 flyer for 3 is not bad, though, and I think that will help maybe put some pressure on your opponent. I still think green-blue is going to be the weakest color, and that's the one that really, uses this. So I'm not sure, the weakest color combo, I should say, the weakest archetype. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's okay though. It's definitely better than a filler. It's certainly a playable. I just don't know quite where it falls yet. So next up, in white, we have Petrify, which is 1 white, 1 colorless for an enchantment aura. You enchant artifact or creature. Enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So this is just a straight up better form of pacifism. I do like particularly that it can enchant artifact or creature, right? The fact that you can put this on, your opponent's Master's Guide mural, and then they can't craft with artifact on it. The fact that you can put this on, like Careening Minecart, which is a vehicle. There's a number of things that you can do with this that is not just putting it on a creature. I think this this card in and of itself is going to wreck most of the signpost uncommons. They all have activated abilities, or most of them have activated abilities, and so the fact that you can put this on them, they can't attack. So Caparocti, Sunborn, right? You can't use its attack ability to get to discover. There's so many good things you can do with this that I like this card. I don't normally like the pacify type thing, but I think that this one really can pull its weight. Plus, as a permanent, even if they get rid of the creature, it goes to your graveyard and it helps feed your Descent.
Yeah, I like the card too. I agree with you that this is like the best along the lines of some of the best pacifisms we've seen. And it is a permanent, so it helps feed into the Descent mechanic as well. The issue that I have, so in a vacuum, this is very, very powerful, but the synergies of the set do involve ways of using your artifacts and creatures in other ways that get around this. So sacrifice, like we saw, was a theme, so that does hurt this card. We also have seen the tapping artifacts in order to trigger abilities. You can still tap it to trigger other cards' abilities, right?
Abilities, yes.
Yeah. So because of that, I do think the context of the set pulls this down a bit. I think we both had this as a C-. Whereas in a vacuum, I rate this like a C+, maybe even B-. But with all the other things going on, I do think this is lower. I will note though that it's still in the playable range. It is a good card, and it even goes up, especially if you are playing best of 3. So if your opponent is playing an archetype that can't take advantage of this, then the vacuum part goes away, right? Like the context goes away. It's just a powerful card. So just wanted to note that.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. I do think the benefit I like of it is, like you said, there are ways to sacrifice creatures or craft with them, craft with artifact, craft with creature. But if you put this on something that your opponent's not going to want to sacrifice, then you basically force your opponent to make a choice that they would not want to make. And I think that for me helps, right? And it's cheap enough at 2 mana that I feel like it is effectively a 2 mana. Get rid of something you don't want to see on the board. And yes, your opponent might be able to use that card to get some extra value out of it later on. But you've still effectively gotten rid of something that you were like, no, I don't want to see this again. Yeah. So, and there's not a lot of enchantment removal in the set. There are a few. So the options for your opponent to just straight up take this out and get whatever they had back is pretty low. But yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. I think I put a C- on that, so I'd probably move it up to a C because there's not a lot of removal in the set, and so getting something like this is kind of important.
Yep. Yep, I can see that. All right.
So now I think we're going on to the cards we differ on.
Yeah. So with cards we differ on, another 3 mana produces 2 rectangles. So we have Plundering Pirate up first in red. 2 in a red for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. I just like my 3 mana 3/2s with upside. So this is similar to Red Cap Thief of Wilds of Eldraine, where it created treasure token, but it was a 2/3. In that set, Red Cap Thief was a low playable, like a C minus or something like that. I do think it's better in this set. I would probably, I think I gave this a C plus.
You did.
Okay. Yeah, I just think the treasure is another incremental artifact that you can use in many ways in this set. And I like 3/2 better than I like 2/3. But what do you think?
Yeah, I gave this a C minus to start. I might be low on it, but I see this playing. I guarantee you, I'm actually low on it. I think it's more like a C, maybe a C plus. And the reason is because I think this plays into both the red white and the red blue archetypes, right? So we looked at the signpost, uncommons, right? So Caparocti, Sunborn, right? This plays great with that, right? Because this gives you 2 rectangles to tap for that Discover 3 ability. This costs 3, so it's discoverable by Caparocti, Sunborn, and then immediately creates 2 more triangles, right? Or not triangles, rectangles.
Get your shapes right, man.
I'm getting my. It's early, so still working on my shapes. But this also plays really good into the red blue with the pirates, right? So this is a pirate. It enters the battlefield. It creates an artifact, which puts a +1/+1 counter on a pirate you control. So then this could, in theory, if you played on turn 2, that pirate captain, you can turn 3. This is now a 4/3, potentially 4/3. Plus, you've gotten on treasure token. In and of itself, I think that brings it up. It's not as good in other versions. I don't know that this is as good in red black or red green. It's still good, but it's not. It doesn't synergize as well with the strategy of those 2 colors. But it's still It's a good card.
You're totally right. Like, I think the most appropriate grade here is a synergy C plus, right? Like, that's how I'm grading it, was in the context of the synergies that it gives. And I think this goes to our point that we said at the start of this episode, right? That there are a lot of mechanics that are less synergistic, but where it's not named the mechanic, those are where the synergies lie, and that's the artifacts being in play to use the tap or coming into play and triggering something, and you just named the synergies that this goes with there. So I think this has power for having those 2 rectangles with the synergies that like to use those rectangles.
Yeah. So next up we have Dead Weight. This is an enchantment aura for 1 black. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets -2/-2. So I think I was a little lower on this one than you were. I'm probably going to come up on it over time as the set goes on. I do think the fact that it costs 1 is great. It's cheap, and it's essentially potentially pay 1 mana to destroy target creature if its toughness is 2 or less, and so that's good. I don't like particularly that it's sorcery speed and that it is a permanent, but that permanent could help, right? Because this helps feed Descend. And I think I did put on my notes, at least, good for Descend, right? So like the ability to potentially destroy a creature with this, and then it has a use in your graveyard, is very good. The thing I don't like about it, right, is the limited utility of only being able to take out something that is 2 toughness or less. I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I could see situations where I might play this on like a 5/5 or something, but I think it's much more limited in that sense. Like, there's very few situations where I'd do that, unless hey, it's the only creature your opponent has out, and I've got a 4/4. I could see that, but I mean, I think it's good early. I'm less convinced of its use later in the game, but there will almost always be a use for it. But what do you think?
Yeah, we've seen this card before. I don't think it was called Deadweight then, but it's always played good and limited. It is typically one of your cheaper earlier removals where your primary use case is kill something that has 2 toughness. And that's how I primarily want to use it. I wouldn't call the lowering something that's really big. I wouldn't call it like rare. Like it does come up and it does matter. and that makes it in a way better than a shock. But with the combination of that and caring about descend, like whether if this kills something, it descends that turn, so that could trigger things, and then it adds to your descend
Yes.
count in your graveyard. With all that, I think this is pretty good. I think this is enough to pull me into black, so I gave it a B minus.
Yeah. I will say though, and I know I didn't put this in my notes, but I was thinking it as a thought. I would like it if this costed 2 but had flash.
I mean, instants do matter.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Because then it's a combat trick that you can use, to basically kill a creature in a way that your opponent might not be expecting. So that for me, like, I really don't like it at sorcery speed because I feel like it limits your options with it a little bit. And I would gladly pay 1 more mana to be able to do it at instant speed. But it is a good card. And I think we can at least agree that it's, while we may have rated it slightly differently, I think I gave it a C minus. I'd probably more likely come up to a C on it. But I do love the descend mechanic, and I probably plan to play black a lot. So my guess is I will probably come up on this over time.
Yeah, I hear you're coming from. I probably would not. I think I would take this card over the +1 in flash, but so like I would pay some fraction more. Maybe I'd pay 1.5 mana, to get the flash ability.
If it was -3/-3 and cost 2, then
yes,
that would
yes,
solve that would solve everything. Right? Note to Wizards. That's the next card. That you make that.
There we go.
That's probably needs to be an uncommon.
Yeah,
that would be really powerful for a common.
Yeah.
All
Are you up on a braid now? Are you up on a braid? That's an instant.
Yeah, I mean, well, I already said a braid was great.
Yeah, but I think
I don't think I rated it in the B's, but I was like, it's easily C+. It's excellent remove.
Yeah, that's why I gave it a B. But yeah. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one. Up next, we have Skullcap Snail. For 1 black, you get a 1/1 fungus snail creature. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent exiles a card from their hand. This kind of card is great in some sets, and it's like not so great in other sets. So it really depends on the context of the set. But any set where permanents matter, both for for your descend stuff, and I think rectangle theory matters. We've talked about that. Of this is a 2-for-1 in that sense. You get a 1/1 that you get one of their cards away. It exiles something, so it doesn't descend for them. And yeah, all that combined is the context of the set. So in this set, I do think that this one will be quite a powerful card. I think I gave this a C+. Yeah, so what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I gave this a D+, not because I don't like the card. I agree with everything you said. I just, having looked over black and the black commons, I think there are better 2-drops that I would probably pick over this most of the time. Not to say that this is bad. I would gladly pick this and play it in a deck. So for me, it was really on that threshold of D+ or C-. But for me, just seeing all the other good black cards, I'm not sure this one is as high a priority for me.
To your point, your priority is interesting there, because priority does mean too, how many paths along the drafting possibilities you reach, and this does cut off aggro, right? You're not playing this in your aggro deck, right? That's not the point of this card. So it does limit you to be more the attrition based type of black, and so
this is black blue. This is not black red necessarily,
or the black white too. Yeah, because the sacrifice theme for your 1/1 and things like that.
Yes, yeah, you could gladly sacrifice this. You're not going to need it later. It's a good chump blocker to Bartolome, right? So yeah, no, definitely, yeah. But it's not like black red. It's probably not. It could be black green. It could be depending.
It depends, yeah. But yeah, so this does limit your scope. But I do think in those decks, you'll see the win rate be high, because when played.
Yes,
it's going to be good in the decks it's played in.
Yeah, and D+ might be too low on this. It might be more like a C-. But I just, having seen all the black commons and uncommons, I'm I'm not sure this does enough for me to be. This is a high pick for me in black. It's definitely a pick. I won't say no to it. It's a good 2-drop creature that's going to force your opponent to make a choice early on what to keep, what not to keep in their hand. And so, anyways, yeah, it's good though. In blue, River Herald Scout, you for 1 colorless and 1 blue, you get a 1/2 Merfolk Scout, and when it enters the battlefield, it explores. So this, yeah, I can't remember exactly what I rated this. It might have been
D+.
lower than yours. What?
D+ is what you had it.
D+, yeah. So this just probably goes to me just not being a huge fan of the Explorer archetype, all right, which is green-blue. I'm not a huge fan of green-blue to begin with. I think it tends to be underpowered. Maybe this will prove me wrong. I mean, it's a little understated as a creature. The fact that it explores when it comes into play, it could get you a land. It could get you a +1/+1 counter on it, which would, make up that value and give you kind of the surveil option with the card. If I'm playing these colors, I'm probably playing this card, but this might just go to my aversion to that color archetype. But anyways, what do you think?
Yeah, I have this as a C+ because I do think it's efficient for what it does. I mean, 2 mana, 1/2 that explores when it enters the battlefield is a fairly cheap way to explore to begin with, so it can trigger all your other cares about something exploring pretty easily. And then it's either a 1/2 draw land or a 1/2 or a 2/3 that lets you scry.
Surveils.
Yeah, or surveil, even more appropriate, right? And all that is really good. So, it's kind of along the same lines as the white one that had the +1/+1 counter comes in. Now, this one you don't really get to choose which approach you get. So, like, if you have a lot of lands, this is not as good in your hand already, right? Like, this is not as good in that case. But in general, I think drawing a land is worth more than a +1/+1 counter on a creature. So, yeah, I have this as a C+ because it does a lot for the 2 mana.
Yeah. Yeah, which is interesting because I think when we get to the next one, we've differed in the opposite way. So I'll let you introduce that, though.
Yep. Up next, we have Brackish Blunder. For 1 and a blue, you get an instant. Return target creature to its owner's hand. If it was tapped, create a map token. Yeah, so we alluded to this one earlier when we talked about the blue-red tempo, and I do think this is a card that goes very well into the blue-red tempo deck. I rated this kind of low. I probably did, like a C- or something?
D. You rated it a D.
Yeah, just because I hate these unsummons. I'm low on a D. So it's a 2 mana unsummon, but you get the map token if it's tapped. I think the if it's tapped part is is enough of a disclaimer on this. Like, I want the map token all the time.
Sure. Sure. But the most common use case for this is going to be your opponent attacks you, and you use it then, and the creature's tapped. So that's why I was like, I'm probably getting the map token 90% of the time because I'm just going to wait for them to swing with the creature and then unsummon it.
See, I like to play bounce differently. My bounce stuff, I like to do a tempo base where I'm on the board already and I need to clear something out, and so I'm doing it to untap things. Now,
absolutely. There's cases where I would do that, but I see this because I see this as more of an early game play where your opponent's playing aggro and you want to slow them down and get the tempo, that you're going to let them attack into you and then just bounce it, get a map token. If you've got the red-white pirate, you're also going to get a +1/+1 counter on something, which is going to help. But yeah, I mean, anyways, I rated this high. I think maybe at a C+. I really like it. I think that it does a lot. I think its most common use case is going to be either in red, blue, or green, blue. Those are the 2 archetypes that I see this falling into. You're not going to play this in... you might play it in blue-white. I could see it in blue-white because you've got a lot of craft with artifact, and this gives you an artifact to craft with. You will not probably play this very often in blue-black. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's overall a decent card for tempos. C+ might be high. It might be more like a C, but I like it.
Yeah, I'm just having a hard time thinking when. I admit that this is a card that I could be wrong on. It's one of those that like I can see myself coming up on it down the line, but I'm think I'm gonna stick with my D for right now, and it'll be one of those like learn for later when I realize this turns out to be like a C plus for some reason. But yeah, I like my bounce and my aggros, and I don't mind it in my controls for bouncing something to slow them down, and then get ahead with some card draw. Um, I don't know. There hasn't quite been enough like control card draw that I've seen that makes me want to do that. Yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. So next up and last in blue, we have Relic's Roar. For 1 blue, you get an instant that until end of turn, target artifact or creature becomes a dinosaur artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/3 in addition to its other types. This is one where we differed a lot, and I rated this pretty high. I rated this as a C+. I really like this card. I think it plays well with the idea of rectangles on the board. I think the fact that you can turn your map token or your treasure token into a 4/3 dinosaur on demand for 1 mana is really good. Your opponent, it attacks into you. You can kill something for 1 mana, or if your opponent's thinking, well, they don't have enough creatures to kill me, and then all of a sudden for 1 mana you pull out a 4/3 dinosaur and attack in and kill them. I think this has a lot of utility. I think it will play better in the blue, white, and blue, green archetypes than the others, but I really like it overall. C plus might be too high, but I don't know that I could come too much below a C, because I think you're going to have enough artifact tokens to use this in most cases, and it's going to be a good trick that you can play on your opponent.
So note when I graded this, I missed that you can put it on an artifact. I thought
Gotcha.
this was only creatures. So I thought this was like best case a giant growth.
I thought that might have been. I looked at it. I was like, I don't know how you got this at a D, because I think this is actually pretty good.
Yeah, no, because this type of card comes up in a lot of sets, but usually it's only on creatures, and sometimes they tack on like draw a card to it because it's really not that good otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw this did none of that, and I just missed that. I saw that it made it into an artifact if it was not. I thought, maybe there's some synergies there, but I'm like, that's not really enough to give me much. But if, turning like a treasure token or a map token or something into a 4/3 all of a sudden out of nowhere, yeah, that is a lot better than I gave the D that I gave it. I'm not gonna come up to a C plus. I think C minus is about appropriate for me.
Yeah, I was probably a little high on it when I saw it, but yeah, it might be more like a C. I don't know, but I do think it has a lot of potential as a combat trick, or a finisher even for 1 mana. It has the option to do a lot of stuff. So, anyways, so I do like it, and the fact that it becomes a dinosaur, right? So if you have something that works with dinosaurs, I mean, you can potentially do something. Although those are mostly in red and green, so I'm not sure you'll have a lot of that. But there are options for it. So, anyways.
All right, and last up on our cards that we differed on, we have Miner's Guidewing. For 1 white mana, you get a 1/1 bird creature with flying and vigilance. When it dies, target creature you control explores. Yeah, I was a bit lower on this card than you were, which I think is pretty common of our, like, I don't like one mana creatures a lot of the time. I don't think it does quite enough for 1 mana. I mean, they are kind of pushing the limits a bit with it has flying, it has vigilance, and when it dies, it gives you upside. I hear all that. I don't hate the card. I'm just still not sure that it does enough. I would probably want synergies to be able to bump up this power and toughness, because once you start buffing it, it becomes quite a threat at that point. Just 1/1/1/1 counter on it, being a 2/2 flying vigilance at that point. But I wish I mean, it would be a way better if it was an enters the battlefield, it explores. I
Oh,
just wish.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. That would be insane, right?
Yeah.
The fact that it could turn one be a 2/2 flyer vigilance for 1 mana. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I really like it. For me, the thing that does it is the vigilance. I like that it has vigilance because it is a good way to be able to ping your opponent for a few damage early. You're probably going to get like 2, maybe 3 damage in with this, which isn't crazy, but it's enough to help push your opponent down a little bit so that later in the game, you can finish them off. And for me, the vigilance is great because you can then still use this as a chump blocker if you need it. And then when it dies, you get the explore effect to potentially get a counter or an additional land if you need it. And so for me, that versatility, while you're absolutely right, it's a 1-drop. It's not super powerful. It can't really kill anything on its own except for another 1/1 or another X1. I do like the vigilance. For me is what makes it really good because it becomes something that you can use early with evasion to get just a couple of extra points of damage in and not have to worry about it not being available a lot. So that for me is why I really like it. I think this will play excellent in black-white. I think this will play excellent in even blue-white, green-white as well, obviously, because you've got explore options. So I think this plays in almost all of the archetypes, even red-white. Like I wouldn't play it as much in red-white because, like we've talked about with the discovers, you don't really want to discover this per se necessarily. But even then, this is a cheap rectangle to be able to tap down for the Caparocti Sunborn's ability, right, later on in the game.
Or for anything else that taps creatures, because the vigilance, to your point, you can attack in and then later use it.
You can attack and then still tap it, later, right, for those abilities. So yeah, I think it's a very versatile card, and that for me is why I gave it a C+.
It is versatile. That's what made me put it into the playables. I had a C-. I'm going to stick at the C- because I a lot of times don't think these are quite powerful enough to be worth spending a card on.
Sure.
But yeah, I can see this. I can see myself coming up on this with enough synergies as well that I may not stick at the C- at the end of the set. That's where I am for now.
Me, yeah, no, and I think that makes sense. So the way I'm looking at this is a card that I'm not necessarily upset to take early in a draft when I haven't committed to my second color, right? If I've identified white as one of my colors, and based on a great rare or a couple of great uncommons early on, I'm happy to take this to over something that I'm not yet sure about. If I don't know kind of what else is available, or I don't have some good signals from players, I'm happy to take this because this plays in almost all of the white X archetypes almost equally well. And so that's maybe why I have it a little higher. It's a cheap creature that you can get out early and will do some work. And then it also plays no matter what your second color ends up being almost.
All right.
So that's all for us today. Thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, because up next, we will be going through the uncommons, the key ones that we think are great to look out for. We'll probably also similarly discuss some of the ones where we have a disagreement on where one of us rates it more highly than the other. And we'll also go over some of the bomb rares and mythics to look out for in the set. And that'll be coming up here very shortly, probably also before the set releases. So it'll be great to, take a look at before you start drafting. So stay tuned, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Okay. See you in the next one.
Yeah.